So today's panel discussion is about Midlands creative landscapes. So the panel brings these two brilliant people together to explore what it really means to be a creative working in the Midlands today. This is a region rich with black and brown communities, cultural knowledge and creative talent. That richness is still not reflected in our galleries, cultural institutions or leadership spaces. This conversation looks beneath the surface at a system shaping that reality and asks why underrepresentation persists despite decades of talent, labour and lived experience. Rather than just naming the problem, this panel is about responsibility, possibility and change. So I'd like to hand it over to first Abid for you just to I've got some questions for you, but I want you to kind of just let us know where you're coming from.
Thank you, Tara. Assalamu alaikum. Is that mic? Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for the invitation to join you, and it's a real pleasure to be here. I just want to start with a little bit of a personal introduction because I think sometimes it's important to get to know each other on a more personal level. So my name's Abid. I'm a British Muslim of Pakistani heritage, born and raised in Birmingham. Guess second generation. I love the title of the conference, All Shades of Brown, because I think it speaks to that theme of allyship and sticking together and being together. And I remember growing up in Small Heath. We grew up in a shared household. And in that shared household, you had Pakistani and Caribbean families living together. And gradually, one by one, the families moved to their own places. But just recognizing that importance of kind of our shared history and some of the challenges that we face. And I guess the work I do probably feels more challenging now than it has ever felt in terms of the landscape that we're operating in, some of the stuff that our communities have to deal with. There's rampant racism, and that's the most polite way I can say it on stage. And we live with the consequences of that. And as somebody who started his career at the Arts Council 25 years ago, I was a young person. I'm now kind of recognizing I'm part of the elders in the community, and there's this intergenerational challenge for us to navigate. And I see this at home with my daughters. So I have three daughters. My eldest is 18, my youngest is 11, and just navigating the world that they live in, the challenges that they're facing are very different to mine, and just trying to be there for them is challenging, but it's the most important responsibility I have as a parent. And I think that same approach reflects itself in the work that I do at the Arts Council. We're the National Development Agency for Arts and Culture. One of my colleagues is here today, Kate, and I do encourage you to reach out and have a conversation with her. So I just want to kind of set that as a little bit of a backdrop to the conversation today. I also say to people, we live in super diverse cities. So if you live in Birmingham, if you live in Leicester, there's super diverse cities. I can't necessarily say the same when it comes to work. I don't think I work in a super diverse city, because when I go into the institutions I meet, the organizations I meet, the leadership doesn't reflect the people I see on the streets. It doesn't reflect the people I see on the bus. So I think there's a real challenge there around who has the power and where that agency is. So I think there's something quite interesting around that conversation around who has the power, how do you share power, and what comes with having assets that you can have, intellectual property assets that can allow you to generate income. As much as I would want more diverse artists to get funding from the Arts Council, I also don't want anybody to be reliant on a sole funder, because I think in the current landscape, it's becoming so challenging. And that kind of brings me back to that theme of allyship, because I think one of the things that frightens me is actually that danger of communities who should be sticking together and supporting each other beginning to splinter. we've had examples in Birmingham, we've had examples in Leicester over the last few years where there's tensions within our communities, and that's something we really need to be alert to. So we're living in a society where there's increasing nationalism, increasing polarization, and sometimes the politics from back home is impacting on our communities here. Where we grew up, we had Caribbean neighbours, Irish neighbours, and Indian neighbours. They were all family. But there's a real danger that we might end up in our silos. And when we end up in our silos, we become vulnerable. And I think that's something that I do really need to mention.
Thank you, Abid. You've covered almost every single point I wanted to cover, so I'm just going to cover the bits that you missed. The first is a bit about myself. I actually started getting interested in social justice in the 80s. I think we go back from the day you started in the Arts Council. But I came to Birmingham from Guyana, South American, when I was 8. And as I told a group last week, it was only when I was 8, 9, in a park in Birmingham, Calthorpe Park, when I was beaten up by a bunch of white kids, that I actually knew I was black. Because in Guyana, the diversity is so wide that you couldn't possibly call the whole people black. So I was, we talked about colorism, etc. But it was that, oh, I'm one of those. I'm a black person. I'm a nigger. I'm a unwelcome person, etc., etc. We have made so much progress. But what we saw last year and the year before makes me wonder, did we go a couple of steps forward and about 20 steps back? One of the things that I see that's very different in today's community around funding in the arts, sorry, I have to go back a tiny bit more. I probably started funding in the late 90s, Black History Month, doing Black History Month events in Birmingham for the Black History Foundation. One of the things that I had to do when I was doing funding and fundraising is keep having this discussion about, is racism real? Because that's the only reason we're here talking about the black arts, because of racism, not because of race, not because of all shades of black, because of racism. One of the things that I am not talking about anymore, and I'm very much with Shola Moss on this one, racism is no longer an opinion. Sadly, I spend a lot of my time when I'm doing anti-racism training and when I'm working with various other groups, including the West Midlands Funders Network, is having to constantly tell people this is why we need special spaces. Not because we're black, but because we're ignored. Does that make sense? So I've believed very, very strongly in, first of all, not having these discussions about the reality of racism. Racism is not an opinion. In the light of that, in funding, in communities, in resource allocation, we need to take positive action to create assets and spaces so that our lives and our heritage and our histories are recognised. One of the it's almost a negative impact on that is some of the times, the only time we are funding black organisations is when they do black stuff, cultural stuff. What about the black artists who just want to write sci-fi, or about the way they see the world, the young people who have voices on so many other things? We are only black when we're doing black stuff. Does that make sense? And the funding has to stop reflecting that. There's a whole history, there's a whole heritage here. I made a note about arts. Oh, arts and politics. This is a funny one. So because of my history, I was a funder. I think the first grant I allocated to communities in Handsworth and Aston in Birmingham was SRB4. It was very, very specified. We were trying to avert crime and community safety, but we funded a lot of arts projects because we recognised that those projects were engaging. What I didn't realise as a naive 20-something-year-old was that the politics behind all the funding regimes that I have now seen that are going on. And one of the things I always felt safe about is there's no politics in the arts. Yes, I'm naive. I'm so sorry. But even our funding through the National Lottery, through the Arts Council, etc., it's all dependent on politics. So we have to be very, very careful that we are aware of those facts. It's not, I would love to think that the funders around the arts are so, enlightened that we don't have to have that discussion. What discussion is that? Does racism exist?